They laughed before they even saw his face. The kind of laughter that rolls easy in a dry town where nothing ever changes and no one expects it to. And it started the moment the black coffin creaked into the main street behind a slow-moving mule, its iron edges catching the late afternoon sun like something that didn't belong to this place, like something that had traveled too far and seen too much. And at the reins walked a man in a worn black coat. Dust settled deep into the fabric as if the road itself had tried to claim him and failed. His hat pulled low, his hands empty. No Bible, no badge, nothing a town like Dry Hollow would recognize as authority. And that was enough for the first chuckle to slip out from a man leaning against the saloon post, which turned into two, then five, then a ripple that spread across the wooden fronts and open windows until the whole street carried it like wind across dead grass. And the man with the mule did not look up, did not slow, did not give them the satisfaction of seeing anything at all in his eyes, because some men learn early that silence weighs more than words when it's carried the right way. And somewhere between the general store and the water trough, the coffin wheels hit a rut and let out a low, hollow sound that didn't match the laughter, something deeper, something that made one child on the porch stop swinging his legs and lean forward, squinting, as if trying to understand why that sound felt colder than the shade he sat in. And that was when the boy asked it, clear and simple, "Mister, what's in the box?" And the question hung there longer than it should have, longer than laughter usually allows, because even the men who had been smiling found themselves waiting for an answer they didn't need and didn't want. But the man in black kept walking, the mule kept pulling, and the coffin kept rolling, and no answer came. Only the quiet rhythm of wood and iron against packed dirt. And at the far end of the street, where the sun dipped lower and shadows stretched longer, a small crowd had gathered around something else entirely, a different kind of entertainment, the kind that comes from certainty and numbers and the comfort of believing you're on the right side of both. And in the center of that circle stood a young Apache woman with her wrists bound in front of her, her chin lifted not in defiance, but in something steadier, something older than the town itself. And the people around her spoke loudly, confidently, as if truth could be decided by volume, as if repeating something enough times made it real. And when the man with the coffin finally stopped at the edge of that circle, the laughter found him again, sharper now, directed. "Preacher," someone called out, grinning wide. "You lose your Bible on the way here." And more voices joined, piling on, easy and careless, because a man without a book couldn't preach, and a preacher without words was just another drifter with nothing to offer. And still he said nothing, only reached back to steady the coffin as it settled into place behind him, his hand resting on the dark wood for a brief moment, almost like a promise, almost like he was remembering something the rest of them had never known. And across the circle, the Apache woman lifted her eyes just enough to see the mark carved into that wood, faint, nearly hidden beneath dust and miles, and whatever she saw there made her still in a different way, not fear, not hope, something quieter, something that didn't belong to this town either. And the wind shifted just then, carrying the smell of dry earth and old timber. And for a second, just a second, the laughter thinned, not gone, but softer, like even it wasn't entirely sure it should still be there. The sheriff stepped forward with the slow confidence of a man who had never been questioned in his own town, boots pressing into the dust like he owned not just the ground but the silence that followed him. And he gave the stranger a long look that started at the hat and ended at the coffin, lingering there just a second too long before his mouth curled into something that passed for a smile around here, something thin and practiced. "You planning to preach, mister, or bury someone?" he said. And a few men nearby chuckled again, relieved to hear a voice they trusted cut through whatever had unsettled them a moment before. And the man in black lifted his eyes, just enough to meet the sheriff's, not challenging, not yielding, just steady, the kind of look that did not ask permission to exist. And when he spoke, his voice came out low and even, like it had traveled a long road and did not care to hurry anymore. "I am only passing through," he said, and that should have been the end of it, should have been simple. But nothing in Dry Hollow stayed simple once the crowd decided it was not finished. And someone from the back called out, "Then pass faster. Preacher, we have business." And that word business drew attention back to the center where the young woman stood, her wrists bound, her presence somehow quieter than the dust, but heavier than the air itself, and the sheriff turned slightly, gesturing with an open hand, as if presenting a fact instead of a decision. This one thought she could take what was not hers, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. And we cannot have that. And a murmur of agreement moved through the crowd like something rehearsed, like something said many times before, and the man in black did not look at the sheriff when he answered. He looked at the rope, then at the woman, then at the people standing closest to her, measuring something none of them could see. You are certain, he said, and it was not a question the way most questions are. It did not invite explanation. It did not leave room for comfort. It simply sat there. And the sheriff's smile thinned further. Certain enough, he replied. A little sharper now, because certainty here did not like being examined. And for a moment, no one spoke, not because they were afraid, not yet, but because something in the air had shifted again, subtle, like the temperature dropping just before sunset. And the boy on the porch slid off his seat and took a few steps closer, eyes fixed on the coffin, because children notice what grown men ignore. And he saw the man's hand still resting on that dark wood, fingers spread slightly, as if feeling for something beneath the surface, and when the wind moved again, it lifted a thin layer of dust from the lid, just enough to reveal a faint line carved into it. Not decoration, not random, but letters, worn and shallow, the kind that had been touched many times by hands that remembered what others tried to forget. And the Apache woman saw it too, her gaze tightening, her breath slowing in a way that did not match the tension around her, and she shifted her weight just slightly, not to escape, not to resist, but to see better, and whatever she recognized there did not bring fear. It brought recognition, the quiet kind that settles deep, and across from her. The man in black finally lifted his hand from the coffin and took one small step forward into the circle, not breaking it, not forcing it, just enough to stand where everyone could see him clearly. And the laughter did not return this time. It hovered somewhere out of reach, as if waiting for permission that no longer felt certain, and the sheriff watched him closely now, no longer amused, not yet concerned, but aware in a way he had not been a few minutes ago. And somewhere in the back of the crowd, a man cleared his throat and said, softer than before, he still does not have a Bible, as if that detail should restore the balance, as if it should explain everything. But the explanation did not come, only the sound of the coffin settling into the dust behind the stranger, heavy, patient, and somehow more present than any voice in the street. The man in black did not raise his voice, did not reach for anything, did not even glance back at the coffin. Yet something about the way he stood there made the space around him feel measured, like every inch of ground had been accounted for before he stepped onto it. And when he finally spoke again, it was not to the sheriff, not to the loudest man, but to the woman in the center, his tone unchanged, calm as shade under a porch roof. What is your name? He asked, and the question landed. Differently than the others, softer, but somehow heavier, because no one here had thought to ask it, not when they had already decided what she was. And the sheriff let out a short breath through his nose, impatience creeping in. Her name does not change what she did, he said, louder now, trying to pull the crowd back into something familiar, something easier. But the man in black did not look at him, not yet, and after a brief pause, the woman answered, her voice steady despite the rope around her wrists. Naya, she said, and it was the first time her name had been spoken in that street, the first time it had been allowed to exist as something more than an accusation, and the sound of it seemed to settle into the dust, into the wood of the buildings, into the ears of people who did not know why it stayed with them. And the man nodded once, small, almost unnoticeable, as if confirming something only he understood, and then he turned, finally, to the sheriff and asked the same question in a different shape. And yours, he said, and a few heads tilted at that, because everyone knew who the sheriff was, knew his name the way they knew the seasons, and yet the question did not feel unnecessary. It felt deliberate, and the sheriff hesitated just a fraction too long before answering. Carter Hale, he said, his voice firm again, reclaiming ground, but that brief pause did not go unnoticed, not by the man in black, not by the woman, not by the boy who had moved even closer now, standing near the edge of the circle with dust on his boots and curiosity stronger than caution. and the man in black let the name hang there for a moment, then repeated it quietly, Hale, as if testing its weight, as if placing it somewhere unseen, and behind him, the coffin gave a faint shift as the mule adjusted its stance, the wood settling with a low sound that seemed to echo longer than it should have, and several people glanced at it again, unwilling but unable to ignore it, because now it felt less like an object and more like a presence, something that listened, something that remembered, and the man stepped back toward it, slow, unhurried, his boots pressing shallow prints into the dirt, and he brushed his hand once across the lid, clearing a little more dust, revealing more of those carved letters, still faint, still worn, but clearer now, enough that a man standing closest to him leaned in slightly, squinting, trying to make sense of what he was seeing, and then straightened again without saying a word, his face losing some of its earlier certainty, and across the circle, Naya watched that movement. Watched the way recognition spread not through words but through silence, and she shifted her gaze back to the man in black, understanding forming in pieces, slow but sure, like dawn creeping over a ridge, and the sheriff took a step forward, not aggressive, not yet, but firm enough to remind everyone where authority was supposed to stand. You have made your point, preacher, he said, though it no longer sounded like a joke. Now move along. And for the first time, the man in black's expression changed, not into anger, not into defiance, but into something quieter, something almost like disappointment. And when he spoke, it carried just a little more weight than before, not louder, just deeper. I have not made my point, he said, and his hand came to rest on the edge of the coffin again, fingers curling slightly against the wood. Not yet. And the street seemed to hold its breath, because whatever came next did not feel like a sermon, and it did not feel like a threat. It felt like something older, something that did not need to raise its voice to be heard. The man's hand rested on the coffin a moment longer, not gripping it, not claiming it, just acknowledging it the way a man might rest his palm on a door before stepping through. And when he lifted that hand, the absence of it seemed to make the dark wood feel heavier, as if whatever it carried had shifted closer to the surface, and he reached instead for the latch, small, iron, worn smooth from use. The kind of detail no one had noticed when the coffin first rolled into town because no one had thought to look that closely, and now every eye did, drawn not by fear yet, but by something quieter, something that asked to be understood before it could be dismissed, and the sheriff took another step forward, voice tightening just enough to show the first crack in his control. You opened that. You had better have a reason, he said, and the words were meant to sound like authority. But they carried a question inside them that had not been there before, and the man in black did not answer him. Not directly. He simply lifted the latch, slow, deliberate, the metal giving a soft click that carried farther than it should have in the still air, and the boy near the edge of the circle leaned forward without realizing it, his breath held, his eyes fixed, because children do not look away from the moment adults pretend is not happening, and the lid rose an inch, then another, the hinges whispering instead of creaking, as if even the wood understood this was not a thing to announce loudly, and no one moved, not the men who had been laughing, not the sheriff, not even the woman at the center whose gaze had locked onto that opening like it was the only thing that mattered now. And when the lid lifted enough to reveal the inside, the man did not step aside, did not present it. He simply let it be seen, and what lay within did not look like anything the town had expected. No cloth, no body, no sign of what a coffin usually holds, only a flat, dark interior lined with folded papers, thin, worn, each one marked in careful ink. And the man reached in and took one, not hurried, not hesitant, and held it between his fingers just long enough for the nearest man to catch a glimpse of writing, real writing, names formed with intent, not scratched, not careless. And the air shifted again, not colder, not warmer, just heavier, like something invisible had been placed in the middle of the street alongside that coffin, and the sheriff's voice came again, sharper now. What is that supposed to be? And this time the man in black answered, turning his head slightly, just enough for his voice to carry to the circle. Without rising, a record, he said, and the word did not explain anything, but it settled into the crowd in a way that made explanation unnecessary, and he let the paper fall back into place, not tossed, not hidden, simply returned and closed the lid halfway, leaving it neither open nor shut, like a sentence not yet finished. And across from him, Naya's eyes moved from the coffin to his face. And there was something different there now. Not fear, not even hope, but recognition of purpose. The kind that comes when a story begins to make sense even before it is told out loud. And the sheriff glanced at the men behind him, seeking that easy agreement he had always relied on, but found instead hesitation, small, quiet, but present, in the way a man shifted his weight, in the way another looked away instead of nodding, and the laughter that had once filled the street did not return, because now there was something else here, something that did not belong to noise, something that asked for stillness. And the man in black stepped back from the coffin, leaving it where it stood, not guarding it, not hiding it, just letting it exist in the center of their attention. And when he spoke again, his voice did not change, but the weight of it did, settling deeper into the ground beneath them. Names, he said quietly, have a way of staying. And no one answered, because for the first time since he had arrived, no one was certain what could be said that would not sound smaller than the truth sitting in that black box. The words settled over the town like dust that refused to lift, and for a moment no one moved, not because they were told to stay still, but because something inside them had shifted just enough to make motion feel uncertain. And the sheriff cleared his throat, the sound sharp in the quiet, as if he needed to remind himself that he was still the one who spoke last in this place. Names do not prove anything, he said, and there was a firmness in it, but also a need, a quiet insistence that the world remained the same as it had been a few minutes ago. And the man in black turned his head slightly, not in disagreement, not in challenge, just enough to acknowledge the words without accepting them. No, he said, calm, steady, they do not. And for a brief second, relief flickered across a few faces, quick and fragile, as if the tension might dissolve back into something familiar. But then he added, unless they are remembered. And that flicker faded just as quickly, replaced by something slower, something that did not know where to settle. And he stepped closer to the coffin again, not opening it further, not closing it, just resting his fingers along the edge as though feeling the shape of what lay inside without looking at it. And his gaze moved across the faces in the circle, not searching, not accusing, just observing, and one by one, people began to feel it, that quiet weight of being seen without being named. And a man near the back shifted his stance, crossing his arms as if that might block whatever passed through that gaze, while another looked down at the ground, studying his boots as though they suddenly required his full attention. And the sheriff noticed it too, the subtle fracture in the crowd he relied on, and his voice came again, louder this time, sharper, trying to pull everything back into place. We are not here for your riddles, he said. This town has its own way of handling things. And that was the truth they all knew, the truth that had kept everything simple, predictable, unquestioned. And the man in black nodded once, slow, as if agreeing with something deeper than the words themselves. Every town does, he said. And then, after a pause that stretched just long enough to be felt, until it does not. And the sentence did not rise, did not strike, it simply settled. And the sheriff's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing just enough to show that whatever patience he had was thinning. You said you were passing through, he replied. Then pass. And this time the man in black did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked past the sheriff, past the crowd, to the far edge of the street where the land stretched out into open dust and sky, as if measuring the distance between leaving and staying. And then his gaze returned, steady as before, and he spoke, not louder, not softer, but with a clarity that seemed to leave no space around it. I will, he said, when this is finished. And the words did not explain what this was, did not define it, but everyone felt it take shape anyway, something larger than the rope, larger than the accusation, larger than the simple idea of a stranger moving on. And across the circle, Naya shifted again, her shoulders easing just slightly, not because she believed she was safe, but because she understood now that what stood beside her was not there by accident, and the boy near the edge took another step forward, drawn not by fear but by the quiet gravity of the moment. And he looked from the man to the coffin and back again, trying to understand how something so still could feel so present. And behind them, the mule flicked its ear and stamped once against the ground. A small, ordinary sound that somehow made everything else feel even quieter. And in that quiet, the man in black finally reached again for the lid, not to open it further, not to close it completely, but to rest his hand there as if marking a place. And when he spoke again, it was almost to himself, almost too soft to belong to anyone else. "There is always one name that decides the rest," he said, and though he did not say which name, though he did not point, every eye in the circle turned, slowly, almost unwillingly, toward the same man standing at the front. And for the first time since the coffin arrived, the sheriff did not speak. No one moved at first, not because they were ordered to stay still, but because something invisible had drawn a line through the center of that street, and no one was certain which side they stood on anymore. And the sheriff felt it before he understood it, that quiet shift in the crowd. The way men who once stood shoulder to shoulder with him now kept a small distance, not stepping away, but no longer leaning in, and he squared his shoulders, drawing in a slow breath as if to reclaim the space that had begun to slip from his grasp. "You speak like a man who knows this town," he said, voice measured now, no longer mocking, no longer careless. And the man in black did not answer right away, his gaze still resting somewhere between the coffin and the people gathered around it, as if both held equal weight. And when he finally spoke, it was with the same calm certainty that had followed him since he arrived. "I know towns like this," he said, and the difference was subtle but sharp. Because he did not claim Dry Hollow, he placed it among many, and that unsettled more than accusation ever could. And the sheriff's eyes narrowed slightly, studying him now not as a stranger to dismiss, but as something harder to define. "Then you know how things are done here," he replied, and a few men nodded, slower than before, but still nodding, holding on to something familiar. And the man in black inclined his head once, acknowledging the truth in that statement without agreeing to it. "I do," he said, "and I know how they end." And that was where the silence deepened again, because endings carry more weight than beginnings, and no one in that street had thought about endings when they tied rope and raised voices. They had only thought about the moment, about being right, about being together, and now that moment stretched longer than it should have, revealing edges they had not noticed before. And the boy near the front looked from the sheriff to the man in black, then to the coffin, trying to follow a path that had no clear direction. And he took one small step closer to it, drawn by something he could not name. And when his fingers brushed the edge of the wood, he pulled them back quickly, not because it was hot, not because it moved, but because it felt like touching something that remembered more than he did. And across the circle, Naya watched that small movement, her expression unchanged, but her breathing steadier now, grounded in something that did not come from the crowd. And the sheriff noticed the shift in her as well, the absence of fear he had expected to see, and it unsettled him in a way he could not admit. So he turned back to the man in black, voice firm again, pressing forward as if momentum alone could restore control. "You are standing between this town and its decision," he said, and for the first time, there was something like warning in his tone, not loud, not aggressive, but present. And the man in black looked at him fully now, meeting his gaze without strain, without effort, as if he had been waiting for that moment to arrive on its own. And when he spoke, the words came simple, unadorned, but impossible to ignore. "No," he said, "I am standing with it." And the distinction settled slowly, like dust finding its place after a long wind, because standing against something can be challenged, resisted, pushed aside, but standing with it meant something else entirely, something that did not move when pressed. And the sheriff felt that difference even if he could not name it, and his jaw tightened again, searching for the next step, the next word that would bring things back into order. But the order he relied on had begun to shift, not breaking, not yet, but bending just enough to show that it could. And behind them, the mule shifted its weight again, the harness creaking softly, and the coffin remained where it was, closed just enough to hold its contents, open just enough to remind them that it could reveal more at any moment. And the man in black let his hand fall away from it entirely now, stepping forward into the space between the sheriff and the woman, not blocking, not shielding, just occupying a place that had not been claimed before. And when he spoke again, it was quieter than any word that had come before, but it carried further, because now everyone was listening. "There is still time," he said, and the meaning of it was not explained, not directed, but it settled into each person differently, some hearing it as a warning, others as a chance, and one man near the back lowered his eyes, his shoulders dropping just enough to show that something inside him had begun to give way, while another took a half step backward, as if distance might place him outside whatever was unfolding, and the sheriff stood there in the center of it all, feeling the weight of every gaze, every silence, every unspoken question pressing in from all sides. And for the first time since he had taken that badge, he did not know which word would come next, or if it would be enough when it did. The words did not echo, but they stayed, hanging in the space between breath and thought, and for a long second no one reached for them, no one claimed them, as if touching them too quickly might make something final that could still be undone, and the sheriff stood there with his weight evenly set, his hands relaxed at his sides in a way that looked practiced, but his eyes gave him away, moving once across the faces behind the man in black, searching not for agreement but for certainty, and finding less of it than he expected, and that absence pressed in on him harder than any challenge could have, because a man can stand against opposition, but uncertainty has no shape to push against, and it spreads quietly, like a shadow that does not belong to any one thing. And somewhere to the left, a man who had been among the loudest earlier cleared his throat again, softer this time, and said, "We do not even know what is written in there," nodding toward the coffin as if naming it might reduce it, make it smaller, and a few heads turned, not fully, not openly, but enough to show that the thought had taken hold, and the sheriff seized on it, quick, almost relieved. "That is right," he said, his voice regaining some of its edge. "A box full of paper does not change the truth." And the words sounded stronger than before, but they did not land the same way, because now they had to compete with something else, something quieter but heavier, and the man in black listened without interruption, without expression, and when the sheriff finished, he gave a small nod, not in agreement, not in approval, just acknowledgement. And then he spoke, not to the sheriff this time, but to the space itself. "Truth does not need to change," he said. "Only the telling of it does." And the sentence did not rise, did not strike, it simply settled, and it unsettled. Precisely because it did not argue, it did not push, it did not need to. And the man near the back who had spoken earlier shifted again, his gaze moving from the coffin to the ground, then to the woman, then back again, as if trying to place himself somewhere that felt safe, and finding no place untouched by what was unfolding. And the boy stepped closer once more, now standing just a few feet from the man in black, his small boots leaving shallow marks in the dust, and he looked up, not afraid, not bold, just curious in the way only someone who has not yet learned to look away can be. "Mister," he said quietly, "do you know all the names?" And the question cut through the tension in a different way, not breaking it, but reshaping it. And the man in black looked down at him, his expression unchanged, but something in his eyes softened just enough to be seen if someone was looking for it. "I know enough," he answered, and the boy nodded slowly, as if that was an answer that made sense, even if he could not explain why. And across the circle, Naya watched the exchange, and for the first time since she had been brought there, something like a breath left her. That was not measured, not controlled, but natural, as if a part of her had been waiting for something small and human to remind her that this moment belonged to more than judgment. And the sheriff saw that too, saw the shift not just in her but in the crowd, the way the edges of certainty had begun to soften, and he took a step forward, closing the distance slightly, not aggressive, but firm, reclaiming ground in inches. "Then speak them," he said, and there it was, the challenge reshaped, no longer about authority, no longer about control, but about exposure. And the man in black held his gaze for a moment, long enough to let the weight of that request settle, and then he turned slightly toward the coffin, not reaching for it yet, not opening it further, just acknowledging it again, like a man standing beside something that does not need to be shown to be understood. And when he spoke, it was softer than before, but it carried further than anything said that day. "Names are not spoken to prove," he said. "They are spoken to remember." And the distinction lingered, quiet, deliberate, and somewhere in that silence, one man near the edge lowered his head completely, as if the act of not looking might excuse him from being seen, while another took a full step back, breaking the line he had held with the others, And though no one said it out loud, though no one pointed or accused, the shape of the crowd had changed, not in number, not in distance, but in something deeper, something that could not be gathered back once it had begun to drift apart. And the sheriff stood in the center of it, feeling that drift like a current beneath his feet, steady on the surface, but moving everything beneath it. And for the first time, the space between him and the man in black felt wider than the few feet of dust that separated them, because now it held something neither of them could step over without consequence. The request did not hang in the air this time. It settled straight down, heavy and direct, and for a moment the man in black did nothing, not because he hesitated, but because he understood exactly what had been asked and what would follow if he answered it the wrong way. And he let that weight sit where everyone could feel it, not rushing to lift it, not easing it, just allowing it to exist. And the sheriff held his ground, his jaw set, his eyes fixed, because now the question had become a test, not of truth, but of who would define it. And the crowd leaned in without moving, drawn tighter by something they did not name, something that felt like the edge of a moment they would not be able to step back from once it passed. And the man in black turned slowly toward the coffin, his movement unhurried, deliberate, as if each step had already been taken somewhere else before it reached this street. And when he reached it, he did not open it wider, did not reveal anything new. Instead, he placed his hand flat against the lid and let it rest there. The gesture simple, almost quiet, but it carried a kind of finality that words often fail to reach. And when he spoke, his voice came low, steady, and certain. "If I speak them," he said, "you will hear them." And the sentence did not sound like a warning, but it was not a promise either. It was something in between, something that left the choice resting not with him, but with those who had asked. And the sheriff did not respond right away, because now the question had turned back on him, and he could feel it, the shift of control he had not expected, the way the crowd no longer looked only to him for direction, but also to the man standing across from him. And that division was small, almost invisible, but it was enough. And one man near the front let out a breath he had been holding, shaking his head slightly as if to clear it. "This is foolish," he said, though his voice lacked the certainty it once held. And another beside him did not agree, did not disagree. He simply stepped half a pace backward, creating space where none had existed before, and that small movement carried more meaning than any shout could have. And the sheriff saw it, saw the fracture widening not through rebellion, but through hesitation, and he stepped forward again, closing distance with intention now, his voice firm, pressing against the moment before it could slip further away. "Then speak," he said. And this time there was no mockery, no dismissal, only insistence. And the man in black lifted his hand from the coffin, letting it fall to his side. And for the first time since he had arrived, he took a full step into the center of the circle, not claiming it, not commanding it, but standing where all eyes could meet him without turning. And he looked around slowly, not searching, not judging, just seeing, and one by one, men who had stood tall lowered their gaze, not all of them, not yet, but enough to be noticed, enough to be felt. And the boy stood very still now, his earlier curiosity replaced by something quieter, something that understood without needing explanation that this moment mattered in a way he would remember long after the dust settled. And across from him, Naya's shoulders straightened slightly, not in defiance, not in relief, but in recognition, as if she could feel the shape of what was coming even before it was spoken. And the man in black drew a slow breath, not preparing, not steadying, just marking the moment. And when he spoke, he did not begin with a name. He began with something else, something that shifted the ground beneath them before any name could land. "There was a winter," he said, and the words carried no heat, no cold, just memory, when a family came through this valley and asked for water. And the sentence moved through the crowd like a quiet current, because it did not accuse, it did not point, but it opened something that had been closed. Something that some men had hoped would remain buried deeper than any coffin could reach. And the sheriff's expression changed, not dramatically, not enough for everyone to see, but enough for those closest to notice, a tightening at the edge of his eyes, a stillness that did not belong to confidence. And the man in black did not look at him, not yet. He let the memory settle first, let it find its place in the silence. And then he added, just as quietly, "Only one door stayed closed." And this time the silence that followed was different, not empty, not waiting, but full, filled with something that could not be easily dismissed, something that had been carried for longer than anyone had admitted, and no one laughed, not even out of habit, because now the story had begun, and once a story begins, it has a way of finding its ending whether anyone wants it or not. The silence that followed did not break. It deepened, settling into the spaces between people, into the cracks in the wooden boards, into the breath each man held without realizing it. And the man in black did not rush to fill it. He let the memory stand on its own, because memory, when left undisturbed, has a way of speaking louder than any voice. And after a long moment, he continued, his tone unchanged, steady as the horizon. They came at dusk, he said, with nothing but a wagon and a child wrapped in blankets. And no one interrupted, no one laughed, because the shape of the story had already begun to take hold. And the kind of men who once filled silence with noise now found themselves listening instead. And he took a slow step across the dust, not toward anyone in particular, but through the circle itself, as if walking through the memory he was laying before them. They asked for water, he repeated, softer this time, and the words carried weight not because of how they were said, but because of how simple they were. And somewhere in the back, a man shifted, his boots scraping lightly against the ground, a small sound that seemed too loud in that stillness, and the man in black did not look at him, did not call him out. But the story bent slightly in that direction anyway. Some doors opened, he said, some did not. And the distinction lingered, quiet, deliberate. And then, for the first time, his gaze moved, not across the crowd, but directly to one place. One man. And though he did not say the name yet, the weight of it was already there, already understood by those who needed to understand. And the sheriff stood very still, his shoulders squared, his face controlled. But something behind his eyes had shifted, something that no longer belonged to certainty. And the man in black let that moment stretch just long enough to be felt, just long enough for the truth to settle where it could not be pushed aside. And then he spoke again. The child was sick, he said, and there was no accusation in it, no blame, just a fact placed carefully into the open. And the boy near the front looked down at his own hands, as if trying to imagine something he had never seen but somehow understood. And across the circle, Naya's gaze lowered slightly, not in fear, not in submission, but in recognition of a story that did not belong to one town alone. And the man in black continued. They did not ask for much, he said, just enough to keep moving. And the words settled again, and this time no one shifted, no one spoke. Because now the story had reached a place where everyone could see where it was going, even if no one wanted to be the one to arrive there first. And the sheriff drew in a slow breath, his chest rising just enough to be noticed. And for a moment it seemed as if he might speak, might cut through the story before it could finish. But the words did not come, and the man in black did not press, did not force it. He simply let the silence remain, let it carry what needed to be carried. And then, quietly, almost gently, he said, one door stayed closed. And this time the sentence did not just linger, it settled directly in front of the sheriff, not as an accusation, not as a demand, but as something that could not be ignored. And the crowd felt it, felt the shift from story to something closer, something immediate. And a man near the edge took another step back, creating more space, while another lowered his hat slightly, as if shielding himself from something he could not see. And the boy lifted his eyes again, looking from the man in black to the sheriff, sensing the connection even if he could not name it. And the man in black finally reached toward the coffin once more, not opening it, not revealing anything new, just resting his hand there again, grounding the moment in something real, something present. And when he spoke next, his voice carried just enough weight to make it clear that the story had reached its edge. And some names, he said, do not fade with time. And no one needed him to say which name he meant, because by now, the silence had already spoken it. No one spoke the name out loud, but it stood there. Anyway, clear as the sun hanging low over the rooftops, and the sheriff felt it settle on him like something heavier than dust, something that could not be brushed away with a word or a gesture. And for a long moment he did nothing, not because he did not understand, but because he understood too well. And the man in black did not press him, did not step closer, did not raise his voice. He simply remained where he stood, one hand resting lightly against the coffin as if it anchored the moment. In place, and the crowd watched, not shifting now, not murmuring, because whatever had begun as a spectacle had turned into something else entirely, something that asked each of them to stand inside it whether they wished to or not. And the sheriff finally exhaled, slow, controlled, and when he spoke, his voice was quieter than before, not weak, but stripped of the certainty it once carried. "That was a long time ago," he said, and the words sounded less like a defense and more like a distance he hoped might still protect him, and the man in black inclined his head slightly, as if acknowledging the truth in that statement without allowing it to settle where it wanted. "Time does not change what was done," he said, and again there was no accusation, no force, just a statement placed carefully where it could not be ignored, and the sheriff's jaw tightened, his eyes shifting for just a moment toward the ground before returning, because even now he was searching for something to hold onto, some piece of authority that had not yet slipped from his grasp. "You do not know the whole of it," he replied, and there it was, not denial, not defiance, but something closer to justification, something that had lived quietly inside him for years, waiting for a moment like this to be spoken, and the man in black did not interrupt, did not dismiss it. He allowed the space for it to exist, because truth, when challenged, often reveals more of itself than when it is forced, and the sheriff continued, his voice steadier now, though not stronger. "There were many people in that winter," he said, "many choices made. And a few men in the crowd shifted again, not stepping forward, not stepping away, but recognizing themselves somewhere inside those words." And the man in black nodded once, slow, deliberate. "There always are," he said, and the agreement did not ease the tension, it deepened it, because now the story no longer belonged to one man alone. It spread, touching others, reaching into places they had hoped would remain separate, and the boy near the front looked from one man to the other, sensing that something important was being decided without fully understanding what it was. And across the circle, Naya's eyes remained steady, watching not the words, but the space between them, where the truth settled and refused to move, and the sheriff drew another breath, longer this time, and when he spoke again, it came slower, as if each word had to pass through something heavier before it could be said. "I made a choice," he said, and the sentence did not rise, did not defend, it simply existed, and the crowd felt it, the shift from explanation to admission, small but unmistakable, and the man in black looked at him fully now, not with judgment, not with approval, just with the quiet attention of someone who had been waiting for that moment to arrive on its own. And he said nothing, because there was nothing left to guide, nothing left to push, only the space for what would come next, and the sheriff stood there in that space, the weight of every eye, every silence, every memory pressing in around him, and for the first time, the badge on his chest did not seem to hold him up, it seemed to rest on him, heavy, unmoving, and behind them, the coffin remained as it was, neither fully opened nor closed, holding its quiet record without demand, without urgency, waiting not for action, but for truth to settle where it belonged. The words did not disappear after he spoke them. They remained, settled deep into the space between him and everyone else. And for a moment no one moved, because movement would have meant choosing a side. And that was no longer as simple as it had been before, and the sheriff stood there with his shoulders no longer squared for command, but held in place by something heavier, something quieter, and he looked at the ground once more, not to avoid, but to see what stood beneath him when the weight of memory pressed down, and when he lifted his eyes again, they did not carry the same sharp edge they once had. They carried something older, something that had waited a long time to be acknowledged, and he reached up slowly, not rushed, not hesitant, just deliberate, and his fingers touched the badge pinned to his chest, resting there for a second longer than necessary, as if measuring what it meant now compared to what it had meant before, and the crowd noticed, not all at once, but in small shifts, in the way a man straightened slightly, in the way another lowered his gaze, because that gesture, simple as it was, spoke louder than anything said so far, and the man in black did not interrupt, did not guide. He simply watched, the same steady presence he had been since the beginning, allowing the moment to belong to the one who needed it most. And the sheriff let out a breath that seemed to carry years with it, slow, controlled, but heavy. And when he spoke again, his voice had changed, not broken, not weakened, but stripped of everything that had once made it easy. "I closed that door," he said, and the sentence did not rise, did not defend. It simply stood, clear and undeniable, and the words moved through the crowd differently than before, not as a story, not as a suggestion, but as something final, something that could not be reshaped once spoken. And one man near the back took a full step away now, not out of fear, but out of understanding, creating space where there had once been none. And another removed his hat slowly, holding it in his hands without realizing he had done so. And the boy looked up at the sheriff, his expression no longer curious but quiet, absorbing something he would not yet have words for. And across from them, Naya remained still, her eyes steady, not forgiving, not condemning, just witnessing, and the sheriff's hand lingered on the badge for a moment longer before he lowered it, his fingers sliding away as if releasing something that no longer belonged to him in the same way, and he did not remove it, not yet, but the weight of it had changed, and everyone could feel it, and the man in black finally spoke again, not to correct, not to add, but to place the final piece where it belonged. "And now you stand before another door," he said, and the words carried no urgency, no pressure, just a quiet truth that had already taken root. And the sheriff looked at him, not as an opponent, not as a stranger, but as someone who had brought something he could no longer ignore, and the space between them no longer felt like distance, it felt like a path, one that had not been visible before. And the sheriff turned his gaze slowly toward the woman in the center, the rope at her wrists, the crowd around her, the decision that had been made before he had ever questioned it. And for a long moment he said nothing, because some choices do not come with words, they come with the absence of them. And the wind moved lightly through the street, carrying dust across the ground in soft lines that erased the marks of where people had stood just moments before. And in that quiet, the town waited, not for a command, not for a verdict, but for something simpler, something harder. The moment when a man decides what kind of truth he is willing to live with. The moment did not arrive with a sound. It arrived with a stillness so complete that even the wind seemed to hesitate at the edge of the street, and the sheriff stood there facing the choice that had already taken shape long before he acknowledged it, his gaze fixed not on the crowd, not on the man in black, but on the rope that bound the woman's wrists, as if that simple line held everything that had been done and everything that could still be undone. And slowly, without announcement, without command, he took a step forward, not the step of authority he had worn for years, but something quieter, something that belonged to a man rather than a title, and the crowd felt it, the difference, the absence of force, the presence of something else that did not need to be declared to be understood, and no one spoke, no one moved to stop him, because whatever had been building in that space had reached a point where interruption no longer belonged, and the sheriff stopped just short of the woman, close enough to see the steadiness in her eyes, the absence of fear he had expected, and for a moment, he simply stood there, as if measuring the weight of what it meant to act now compared to the weight of what it had meant to do nothing before. And then, with a motion so simple it might have gone unnoticed in any other moment, he reached out and loosened the rope, not hurried, not hesitant, just deliberate, the fibers slipping free under his fingers as though they had never been meant to hold, and the sound of it was soft, barely there, but it carried through the silence like something far larger, because it was not the rope that mattered, it was the choice behind it, and the woman did not step away immediately, did not react with relief or shock. She simply lowered her hands slowly, the marks of restraint fading into something that no longer held power over her, and she looked at him once, not with forgiveness, not with anger, but with a quiet acknowledgement that the moment had shifted, and that was enough. And behind them, a man who had stood firm at the edge of the circle took another step back, then another, until he was no longer part of it, and others followed in smaller ways. A glance turned away, a stance loosened, a certainty released, and the shape of the crowd changed again, not breaking apart, but no longer unified in what it believed, and the sheriff stepped back as well, not retreating, but making space, allowing the moment to stand on its own without claiming it. And his hand rose once more to the badge on his chest, lingering there as it had before, but this time there was no hesitation in what followed, only a quiet understanding, and he removed it, slow, careful, the metal catching the light for a brief second before it left his coat, and he held it in his hand, looking at it not as something that defined him, but as something that had carried a meaning he had not always honored. And he did not throw it, did not discard it. He simply lowered it, letting it rest at his side, as if returning it to a place where it could no longer speak for him. And the man in black watched without expression, without approval, because none was needed, and the coffin remained where it stood, unchanged, holding its quiet record without demand. And the boy looked from the badge to the rope, then to the man in black, trying to understand how something so small could change so much. And across the street, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that stretched across the ground, softening the edges of everything it touched. And in that light, the town no longer looked the same, not because the buildings had changed, but because something within it had shifted, something that would not easily return to what it had been before. The town did not return to noise right away. It stayed in that quiet space where something had been changed and no one yet knew what to call it. And the man in black stood where he had been, not moving to claim what had happened, not offering a word to explain it, because some moments do not belong to the man who brings them. They belong to the ones who must live with them after. And the sheriff remained still for a long breath, the badge resting in his hand, no longer catching the light the same way, no longer carrying the same weight it once had. And he looked down at it once more before closing his fingers around it gently, not hiding it, not discarding it, just holding it as something that would have to be earned again. And then he stepped aside, not retreating, not yielding, but making room in a way he had not done before. And the woman walked past him, not hurried, not cautious, just steady, her steps leaving faint prints in the dust that the wind would soon carry away. But for now they remained, a quiet record that something had changed. And as she passed the man in black, their eyes met for a brief second, not long enough for words, not needing them, just enough to acknowledge that the moment had been seen from both sides. And she continued on, leaving the circle behind her without looking back, because some things are not meant to be revisited once they have been understood. And the boy watched her go, his gaze following her steps until she reached the far edge of the street. And then he turned back, looking at the man in black, at the coffin, at the place where the rope had been, trying to piece together what he would remember from this day. And the man in black finally moved, not toward the crowd, not toward the sheriff, but back to the coffin, his hand resting on the lid once more. And this time he closed it fully, the sound soft, final, as if a page had been turned and would not be opened again. And he secured the latch without haste, without emphasis, just completing what had been left unfinished. And then he turned to the mule, adjusting the reins with the same quiet care he had shown in every movement since he arrived. And no one stopped him, no one spoke to him, because there was nothing left to ask that had not already been answered in a different way. And he began to walk, the mule following, the wheels of the coffin rolling slowly over the same ground where it had first entered. But the sound it made now was different, not because the wood had changed, but because the ears that heard it had. And as he passed the sheriff, he did not pause, did not look, but the sheriff inclined his head just slightly, a gesture, so small it might have been missed if someone was not looking for it. And that was enough. And the man in black continued on, leaving the street behind him the same way he had entered it, without announcement, without demand, carrying with him nothing that had not already been placed where it belonged. And the crowd remained where it stood for a while longer, not speaking, not dispersing, each man holding his own thoughts in a way that did not need to be shared. And one by one, they began to move, slower than before, quieter, as if the ground beneath them required a different kind of step now. And the boy stayed where he was until the coffin had disappeared down the road, until the sound of its wheels faded into something the wind could carry away. And only then did he turn, looking back at the place where everything had happened. And though there was nothing there to mark it, no sign, no trace, he knew, in the way only a child can know, that something important had been left behind, something that did not need to be seen to remain. And as the sun dipped lower and the shadows stretched longer across Dry Hollow, the town settled into a silence that felt different from before, not empty, not heavy, but honest, the kind of silence that comes when no one feels the need to fill it with anything else. And somewhere beyond the edge of that town, the man in black continued down the road, the coffin steady behind him, carrying fewer names than before, and leaving behind a place that would remember the rest.